Welcome to the deep dive. We are so glad you're here with us today.
Yeah, thanks for joining us. We have a really fascinating one today.
We really do. But let me ask you a question right off the bat. Have you ever had one of those days?
Or, let's be honest, one of those weeks.
Right. A week or even a year where you just feel entirely overwhelmed by that constant chattering monologue inside your own head?
Oh, I think everyone knows that feeling.
Exactly. You're walking down the street or you're sitting at your desk, and instead of actually experiencing the world around you, your brain is just a chaotic ticker tape.
Endlessly scrolling.
Endless to-do lists, imaginary arguments with your boss in the shower, or just vague panics about the future.
Yeah, you are physically present, but mentally you are miles away.
Just going through the motions on autopilot.
It is a universally exhausting human experience. And honestly, it's the baseline reality for most of us in the modern world.
Which is exactly why the material we are exploring today is so vital. Today, our mission is to unpack some truly mind-blowing excerpts from a 2026 book by Michael Chaskelson.
From Mindfulness to Wakefulness, Science and Practices on the Journey to Enlightenment.
That's the one. We are taking a deep dive into how we can move beyond using basic mindfulness as just a quick stress relief tool.
Right, like treating it like popping an aspirin for a headache.
Exactly. Instead, we are looking at how to use it as an actual pathway to what the author calls wakefulness.
A state of being intensely alive, deeply connected, and incredibly clear.
And I want to be super clear right from the start here. This is not about running off to the mountains to become a levitating monk.
Definitely not.
It's about practical, science-backed ways to fundamentally upgrade how you experience every single day of your normal life.
And that distinction is crucial. The text goes to great length to establish that awakening is a natural biological state.
Not supernatural.
Right, not mystical. It is simply how the human mind functions under a specific set of optimal conditions.
Meaning we can actually control it.
Precisely.
Yeah.
Because it's a biological function, we can use modern psychology and neuroscience to gradually increase our own level of wakefulness day by day. We can literally wire our brains to be more awake.
So let's unpack that word for a second, awakening, because it carries a ton of cultural baggage.
Oh, absolutely.
When people hear that word, they tend to think of thunderbolts from the sky or burning bushes.
Enlighten with a capital E.
Exactly. But the book contrasts two very different stories to show that this actually operates on a spectrum.
Right, starting with the extreme end.
Yeah, the famous story of Eckhart Tolle. He was dealing with intense suicidal depression.
Just a really dark place.
Very dark. And one night he had the thought, I cannot live with myself any longer.
But then his brain catches the weird phrasing of that sentence.
Yes. He asked, am I one or two? If I can't live with myself, there must be two of me.
Which is such a profound realization.
And that sudden realization shattered his ego in an instant, leading to a massive permanent shift in his consciousness.
But Tolle's story is dramatic. It's highly unusual. Most of us are not going to experience a spontaneous, permanent dissolution of the ego in our bedrooms at 2:00 a.m.
Right. Which is why I love the second story the text provides. It's a much milder, relatable example of awakening.
The mother in the redwoods.
Yes. Imagine a mother walking in the redwoods. She is completely consumed by despair because her adult daughter is struggling with severe drug addiction.
A very real, very heavy burden.
She's been trying everything to save her child, carrying the weight of the world, and suddenly, looking at those ancient trees, she has a quiet realization.
She simply cannot live someone else's life for them.
Exactly. The physical weight of that impossible responsibility just lifts from her shoulders.
That moment of release is also an awakening. It's a sudden dropping of the illusion of control and a massive shift in perspective.
That really reframes what we're aiming for here. It's fundamentally about getting out of the ego.
Yeah.
The book uses a great sports analogy to explain how the ego actually ruins our experience. It focuses on the British tennis star Andy Murray.
Oh, this is a great analogy.
If you've ever watched Murray play, when he is in the zone, what psychologists call a flow state, he is untouchable.
In that state, there is no ego.
Right. There is no Andy Murray thinking about Andy Murray. There's just the ball, the racket, and the court.
But the second he misses a shot,
His inner critic chimes in. His ego reasserts itself. He loses the flow, starts yelling at himself, smashes his racket, and the magic is gone.
The science behind why that inner critic is so persistent is incredibly revealing. It comes down to a neurological system called the default mode network.
The DMN.
Right, and this was discovered somewhat accidentally in 2001 by a neuroscientist named Marcus Rachel.
He was putting subjects inside MRI scanners, right?
Yes, and for anyone who hasn't been in an MRI, it is a bizarre, cramped, incredibly loud magnetic metal tube.
It sounds like someone is hitting a trash can with a baseball bat right next to your head.
Perfectly described. So Rachel assumed that when he didn't give the subjects a specific mental math problem to do, their brains would power down and just process the weird, loud physical reality of lying in that tube.
But they didn't do that at all.
No, they didn't.
Which is where this gets really interesting. Inside this loud machine, their brains completely ignored their physical surroundings.
Instead, a specific network of the brain fired up, and they defaulted to thinking about entirely random personal narratives.
What they were having for dinner.
Or replaying an awkward conversation they had last Tuesday, or worrying about a project at work.
Their minds instantly hijack their attention away from the present moment to obsess over the story of me.
The default mode network is essentially the neurological home of the ego. It is the brain's narrative mode.
And while it's useful for long-term planning, it's heavily overactive in modern humans.
Extremely overactive. Psychologists Matthew Killingsworth and Daniel Gilbert conducted a massive study where they pinged people at random times on their smartphones.
To ask 3 things, right?
Right. What are you doing? What are you thinking about? And how happy are you?
And the results were staggering.
They discovered that our minds wander 47% of the time.
Almost half our waking lives.
We spend almost half our lives not mentally present in what we are actually doing. And furthermore, their data proved mathematically that a wandering mind is an unhappy mind.
And here's the part that just totally blew my mind. Even when people's minds wandered to pleasant thoughts, like an upcoming vacation,
They still reported being less happy than when they were fully present doing a mundane task.
like doing the dishes. Why is that? Why does just being in the narrative mode make us miserable?
It comes down to what the default mode network is actually doing while it wanders.
Yeah.
It constantly runs a painful background comparative analysis.
Comparing what to what?
It monitors the gap between 3 different versions of ourselves. First, there is our actual self, which is who we think we are in this exact moment. Then there is our ideal self, the person we desperately wish we could be. Finally, there is our ought self, the person we feel we should be based on societal expectations or familial pressure.
Oh, wow.
When the DMN focuses on the gap between the actual self and the ideal self, we experience feelings of dejection, disappointment, and sadness.
And the ought self.
When it focuses on the gap between the actual self and the ought self, we experience fear, guilt, and anxiety.
That makes so much sense when you think about modern habits.
Doom scrolling.
Yes. When you are doom scrolling on LinkedIn at 11 p.m. looking at a former classmate's promotion, that is your default mode network screaming at the gap between your actual self and your ideal self.
We literally talk ourselves into being miserable.
Because we think we are these isolated, separate egos that have to constantly defend and improve our standing in the world.
But the text argues that this feeling of separateness is a complete delusion.
And the author uses a really strange, highly specific story about a flower in his garden to prove this point. Can you walk us through that?
It is a brilliant exercise in seeing the invisible web of conditions that make up our reality. The author looks at a beautiful pink flower in his Cambridge garden, a cultivar called the Lavatera Barnsley.
Okay.
He asks, what conditions allowed this specific flower to exist right here, right now? You would normally think, well, soil, water, and sun.
Right, the basics.
But the web goes infinitely deeper. That plant only existed in that exact spot because the author and his wife met at a meditation class in 1987.
Fell in love and bought that specific house.
Exactly.
And it doesn't stop there.
Far from it. They only met because his parents met at a tennis party in Johannesburg in the 1950s.
Wow.
His parents only met because his father did not get a flat tire on the way to that party.
That is wild.
And the flower itself only exists because a woman named Rosemary Very found a unique genetic mutation in a different plant years ago and bred it.
So all of history, all of human connection, physics, biology, and even the random luck of a car tire.
All of it had to align perfectly for that one pink flower to exist for a fleeting moment.
The point being that everything is conditioned.
Everything is impermanent. Nothing including our cells, has its own isolated, separate substance.
Okay, I love the poetry of that interconnectedness. But to push back a little on behalf of our listeners, if I am terrified about missing a massive deadline at work tomorrow, telling myself I'm connected to a flower and a 1950s tennis party doesn't really help me.
No, it doesn't.
How do we practically escape the painful narrative of the default mode network and actually get into the present?
That is exactly the trap the mind sets for us. But research by Norman Farb and Zindel Segal gives us a highly practical neurological tool to break out of that loop.
Sense foraging.
Yes, sense foraging. Farb and Segal found that our brains have two distinct ways of interacting with the world. We have the narrative region, the default mode network we've been discussing, but we also have an experiential region.
The present moment network.
Exactly. And the key biological fact here is that you cannot easily run both networks at full capacity at the same time.
So it's like a seesaw in the brain.
Precisely. If you deliberately send your attention out to forage for physical sensations, really looking at the intricate texture of a shadow on your desk,
Deeply smelling your coffee.
feeling the exact temperature of the air on the back of your neck, you activate the experiential network. Doing so physically turns down the volume of the narrative network.
It isn't about ignoring your impending deadline.
No. It is about recognizing that agonizing over the deadline while you are making your coffee doesn't get the report written either.
That distinction is huge. You can't just bully your brain into being quiet. The sources reference Daniel Wegner's famous 1987 white bear experiment to prove this.
Such a classic study.
Wegner told participants to sit in a room and absolutely under no circumstances think about a white bear.
And if they did, they had to ring a bell.
Of course, the room became a symphony of bells ringing constantly. If you try to force your thoughts to stop, you just create a secondary layer of thoughts about stopping your thoughts.
Suppression is a failed strategy. Instead, you have to use what psychologists call meta-awareness. You simply notice that your mind has wandered to a thought about a white bear, or your stressful email, or an argument with your partner.
And instead of getting angry at yourself for wandering,
You gently shift your attention back to your senses. You sense forage. You notice the thought, and you return to the temperature of the room or the sound of traffic outside.
and every single time you do that, you are performing a neurological bicep curl.
You are physically rewiring your brain out of the default mode network and building the capacity for wakefulness.
And we really need those neurological bicep curls, especially given how modern society is currently rewiring us in the opposite direction.
We are constantly pulled away from the present.
Which brings us to a fascinating paradigm-shifting theory by Ian McGilchrist about the divided brain. We've all heard the old pop psychology about the logical left brain and the creative right brain.
But McGilchrist says that's completely wrong.
He completely upends that old model.
He does. McGilchrist explains the two hemispheres through the lens of attention. Imagine a bird feeding on seeds on the ground.
Okay.
The bird needs a highly narrow, hyper-focused, targeted type of attention to pick a tiny seed out from the gravel. That narrow focus is the left hemisphere. It isolates, manipulates, and uses the world as a tool. McGilchrist calls it the emissary,
But if the bird only uses that narrow focus, it's going to get eaten by a cat in about 5 seconds.
which is why, simultaneously, the bird needs a broad, open, vigilant awareness that connects it to the wider environment, to watch out for predators and stay attuned to the rest of the flock.
And that broad, connective, contextual awareness is the right hemisphere.
Yes, McGilchrist calls it the master. The emissary is supposed to serve the master. It gathers the seed and brings it back to the broader context of survival.
But in our modern, hyper-capitalist, smartphone-addicted society, the emissary has usurped the master.
We are trained to view everything as a tool to be used, a metric to be tracked, or an object to be manipulated.
We see this all the time. Think about someone looking at a breathtaking sunset. The master brain just wants to stand there and experience the awe of the colors.
But the emissary brain immediately takes over, pulls out a smartphone, and tries to capture, manipulate, and post it to Instagram for likes.
We miss the actual world in the process. There is a heartbreaking story in the book about a woman named Megan Wrights that illustrates this perfectly.
It is a tragedy of modern attention. Megan worked at a business school located inside Ashridge House in the UK.
And this location is breathtaking. It's a 13th century former monastery. It was the childhood home of Queen Elizabeth I, and it's surrounded by hundreds of acres of lush historical gardens designed in 1813.
It is a literal architectural and natural masterpiece. Yet every single morning, Megan would park her car, pull out her phone, and briskly walk through this stunning landscape staring at her emails.
She completely ignored the miraculous beauty surrounding her because her emissary brain was entirely obsessed with productivity and narrow tasks.
And she's not alone in that. We all do it.
We do, and it echoes a very poignant warning from Charles Darwin.
Yes. Late in his life, Darwin wrote in his autobiography that his mind had become nothing more than a machine for grinding general laws out of large collections of facts.
A machine for grinding general laws. What a brutal way to describe your own mind.
He realized with deep sadness that he'd completely lost all pleasure in poetry, art, and music. His emissary brain had completely taken over his perception. He noted that the loss of these tastes was a loss of happiness and an enfeeblement of his emotional nature.
Contrast Darwin's tragic realization with the story of the English playwright Dennis Potter.
This story is so powerful.
Potter was dying of terminal pancreatic cancer. He knew he only had months to live. He gave an interview where he described looking out his window at a flowering tree.
Because he had been forced to drop all of his ego's concerns about the future, because he literally had no future left to plan for, the master brain took over completely.
He said he didn't just see a tree. He said it was the whitest, frothiest, blossomiest blossom that there ever could be.
He said the nowness of everything was absolutely wondrous.
What the author is urging us to realize is that we must actively cultivate our naturalistic imagination and our appreciation for beauty now.
We shouldn't have to wait for a terminal diagnosis to force us out of our emissary brain.
We have to purposefully pause, forage for sensory beauty, and let the master brain connect us to the awe of being alive on a random Tuesday.
Absolutely.
Okay, so we've talked about waking up our senses and appreciating beauty, but what about our connection to other people?
A huge part of wakefulness.
Because the narrow focus of the ego doesn't just block out trees, it blocks out humanity. Let's talk about the famous 1970 Good Samaritan study at Princeton University. This completely changed how I view human compassion.
It is a highly revealing piece of research. Researchers took a group of seminary students, literally people studying to be moral and spiritual leaders, and told them they needed to walk across campus to give a talk.
For half of these students, the assigned topic of their talk was actually the biblical parable of the Good Samaritan.
So they are literally walking across campus, actively thinking about a story of a man who stops to help a beaten stranger on the road.
Yes, and along their route, the researchers planted an actor in an alleyway. This actor was slumped over, coughing and groaning in obvious distress.
Now, you would naturally assume that the students about to give a speech on the Good Samaritan would stop to help.
Right.
But the deciding factor of who stopped had absolutely nothing to do with their morals, their religious training, or even what they were currently thinking about.
The only metric that mattered was how much of a hurry they were told to be in.
Some of the students who were told they were running late literally stepped directly over the groaning man to get to their destination.
They stepped right over him. It perfectly illustrates how the emissary brain's narrow focus on a goal entirely shuts down our broad, compassionate connection to others.
Being in a hurry literally narrowed their cognitive map until a suffering human being became nothing more than a physical obstacle in their path.
If we want to move toward wakefulness, we have to structurally slow down our lives.
Wakefulness requires us to cultivate kindness, not as an abstract concept, but as an active daily practice. The text shares the story of Bernadette Russell.
This was during the 2011 London riots, right?
Yes. The news was flooded with violence. She was feeling utter despair about the state of the world. She was standing in line at a post office, and a young man in a hoodie, looking very much like the youths being demonized on the television, was ahead of her.
He didn't have enough change to buy a stamp.
On a whim, she simply paid for it. He was incredibly grateful, thanking her profusely. That tiny, unexpected interaction completely shifted her out of her despair.
It felt so powerful that she decided to do one kind act every day for a year.
And she ended up keeping that habit going for 13 years.
That is incredible. And doing that actually changes our baseline happiness, doesn't it? The sources bring up the hedonic treadmill. Can you explain what that treadmill is and how connection gets us off it?
The hedonic treadmill is our brain's frustrating tendency to adapt to whatever happens to us, good or bad. Think of it like running on a literal treadmill. You're expending energy, but your position in the room never changes.
The text cites a classic 1978 study comparing the happiness levels of people who had recently won the lottery with people who had recently become paralyzed in catastrophic accidents.
And after a period of adjustment, the lottery winners were not significantly happier than their baseline. and the accident victims were not significantly less happy.
We adapt to our circumstances. You cannot buy your way off the treadmill.
So how do we get off? The research of psychologist Barbara Fredrickson shows that the active cultivation of gratitude and positive connection is the only proven way to step off the treadmill.
When we experience genuine connection and love, it physically changes our biology.
It improves the tone of our vagus nerve.
Let's clarify that for a second. What exactly is vagal tone?
Think of your vagus nerve like a physical brake pedal for your body's stress response. It connects your brain to your heart and regulates your nervous system.
Just like a muscle, this nerve has a tone.
Right. When you actively connect with people and practice gratitude, you are essentially doing reps at the gym for that brake pedal. You are making it stronger and faster at calming your racing heart.
People with high vagal tone are quite literally physically wired to be more resilient, more loving, and happier.
If connecting with others is the gym for our vagus nerve, who should we be connecting with?
The text brings up the anthropologist Robin Dunbar and his famous Dunbar's number.
He argues our brains can only really handle about 150 stable relationships.
But within that, we have tiny concentric inner circles. And to figure out who belongs in your deepest inner circle, he uses what he calls the Hong Kong airport at 3 a.m. test.
I absolutely love this visual.
If you were stuck in a departure lounge in Hong Kong at 3 a.m., who are the people you wouldn't hesitate to walk right up to and sit next to, knowing they'd be thrilled to see you?
Those are your true friends.
It is a brilliant metric.
Dunbar notes that these inner circle friendships are typically built on 7 pillars of shared experience. Things like growing up in the same area, sharing a language, similar educational backgrounds, common hobbies, a shared worldview, a similar sense of humor, and musical tastes.
But the real magic of these friendships isn't just having things in common. It is what the psychiatrist Daniel J. Siegel calls attunement.
What does attunement actually look like in practice?
It is more than just an exchange of data or conversation. Think of it like 2 tuning forks resonating at the exact same frequency.
When we are deeply engaged with a true friend, our inner states physically sync up. We read their facial expressions, their tone of voice, their posture.
In that moment of deep attunement, the rigid boundaries of the isolated ego soften, and we experience a shared mental hub.
That physical shift from isolation into true connection is the very essence of wakefulness.
We have covered an immense amount of ground today. Let's synthesize our takeaways. Our mission was to explore how to move beyond basic mindfulness as a band-aid for stress and step into true wakefulness.
What we've learned from all these studies and stories is that wakefulness isn't a magical destination you arrive at in a puff of smoke.
It is built in the tiny, everyday moments.
It is actively choosing to forage for sensory input instead of getting lost in the actual versus ideal self-gap of the default mode network.
It is pausing to let the master brain appreciate the blossomiest blossom.
It is refusing to let the emissary brain put you in such a frantic hurry that you step over a suffering person in your path.
By doing these things, you aren't just thinking happy thoughts, you are actively, biologically rewiring your brain for connection, high vagal tone, and joy.
If we look for the deepest underlying root of why we resist this wakefulness in the first place, we find one final, profound thought in the source material.
Why do we stay trapped in our speeding, narrating egos?
Humans are the unique animals burdened with the conscious knowledge of our own mortality. We know we are going to die.
Sigmund Freud theorized that the root of all our neuroses, our endless anxieties, and our frantic busyness is our desperate, lifelong repression of the terrifying fact that our lives are finite.
We say busy so we don't have to look at the clock.
The book compares life to an eternal feast. We join the table when we are born, we watch others arrive, and eventually we have to watch people we love leave the feast and go out into the cold night.
And we know deep down that one day we have to get up from the table and walk out into the dark too.
So I want to leave you with this lingering question to mull over on your own. If you stopped repressing that fact, if you fully, bravely embraced that your time at this feast is terrifyingly, beautifully limited, how would that change what you choose to pay attention to for the rest of your day?
A powerful thought to end on.
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Take a breath, look around you, and we will see you next time.